It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk, and a lot of happenings in China over the weekend, and it's kind of fascinating to see how this is all going to play out. And is this an indication of what we could expect in the United States when it comes to another flare-up of COVID-19? We're hearing of ABC News reporting on the latest, and this is coming in late last night. When it comes to what's going on with China. Actually, let's go to Justin Finch with ABC News talking about the COVID lockdowns and how it could be impacting markets this morning as well.
Asian financial markets were down in early trading on news of the rare China protest and supply chain concerns. At Foxconn's largest iPhone plant, police in hazmat suits seen coming to blows with protesters last week, following reports of workers upset by delays in bonus payouts and the company's handling of a COVID outbreak.
So the COVID-19 situation in China is very tenuous with not just the COVID zero policies continuing, but you've also got a quarantine camp that I've seen estimated could house up to 70 or 90,000 people. Video of that being shown over the weekend, but also over the weekend, video being shown of violent protests in China, where Chinese residents taking to the streets to protest the COVID zero policies. And here's a little bit of what CNN had to say when it comes to the situation over the weekend with China ultimately seeing its residents take to the streets and fight against COVID zero policies and lockdowns. And a lot of this being spurred after a high-rise dwelling was on fire in China, and they had actually closed off those entrances and exits. And it took about 3 hours for them to respond. But this was a high rise that was ablaze. And still not really a lot of clarity as to what happened there, because if you look at Chinese-run media, there's really not much they're reporting on any of this. And it's kind of fascinating to see a totalitarian state do just that, not report on what's going on the ground with people protesting. And if you haven't seen some of the videos, it is rather incredible. And one place that I've been going to pull up some of these videos is Twitter, of all places. And that's where you can see a lot of this. And we'll, of course, be showing you some of it if you're following along on our live stream, facebook.com/WMAY News. But let's go to CNN, where they laid out what's going on over the weekend with a 30-second report here.
Anger continues to boil over in China over the government's unrelenting zero COVID policies. Protests have erupted in multiple cities across China, demanding an end to strict government COVID restrictions and lockdowns. In some parts of the country, residents have been forced to stay in their homes for weeks on end. Officials there saying that the restrictions are necessary to protect lives. Now, despite the lockdowns, China is seeing a record number of COVID cases since the start of the pandemic. Authorities this week reported more than 30,000 new cases a day.
So it'll be interesting also to see just how the corporate media in this country is going to cover this, considering that, earlier this year, you had protests in the Netherlands of farmers protesting against government policies when it came to COVID or when it came to the environment. You also had the ongoing unrest in Canada with truckers that were protesting COVID mandates in our neighbors to the north. And the way that the corporate press in this country reported on that widely was critical of those protests. But here we have protests the size of what's going on in China that we've never seen before. And it's obviously raising questions on how things are going to be reported in the future when it comes to unrest in China. And again, just some of the images coming out of China and the protests over the weekend, pretty staggering. Now, to see a few like one-off protests here and there, that's possible. You hear about that all the time in China. But when it comes to the widespread nature of these protests and just how upset people are. I mean, just the images, incredible. With people throwing barricades at men wearing white body uniforms and masks, and they're the so-called sick police. This is historic and so widespread in China. And again, if you try to go to China Daily News, which is the official state news website, you don't really get that much. So let me see if I can pull this up and take a look at some of the headlines here that China Daily News has, and it doesn't look that great. And as far as the suppression of information that China is known for, and you see this all the time as well when it comes to the unrest that the citizens in China are expressing. And we'll just again flash over to the ChinaDailyNews.com, and what are some of the headlines here? China's pursuit of science-tech goals benefit the world. You've got other headlines. The world in photos, kicking gambling out of soccer, pandemic not officially over. Well, that's fascinating. They've got an article here about Dr. Anthony Fauci saying that the pandemic is not over. That is according to ChinaDaily.com. But one thing about ChinaDaily.com, let's see if we can go back here and try to search, as you could search all kinds of news websites. Let's search protest and see what we get. And again, this is in the aftermath of the protests erupting all across China and just how widespread they are. But trying to search for protests on China's official daily news website, and it's not coming up at all. There's no indication of stories about protests on their front page, and trying to do a search for protests via their search function on their websites, not really producing any results. We'll continue on with the conversation. Of course, you can chime in as well at 217-629-7970. That's 217-629-7970 about the protests in China. But also coming up, we'll talk about what we could possibly expect here in the United States when it comes to COVID mitigations. Dr. Anthony Fauci making the media rounds yesterday, so we'll get to some of that as well. It's right here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Let's take a break for some news headline. All right, we're back talking about the unrest in China. Not really ever seen before on this scale, but it's after continued COVID-19 policies that has people locked into apartment high-rises, that has people having to test daily, that has people not being able to leave their homes or to take part in various economic transactions. This, of course, is pretty wild to see unfold over the weekend. And one of the protesters reportedly said that, look at the World Cup. We were talking about that earlier, about the World Cup on an international stage and how sometimes politics can spew out of these international sporting events. And when it comes to China and the residents in China, seeing that there are people at the World Cup not wearing masks, there are athletes who had COVID who are back on the field doing their thing and performing at a high level. So it's got people in China taking to the streets again in an effort to fight against this zero COVID policy. And you're seeing again some of the images that are just rather fascinating, quite frankly, because you see men in black SWAT gear pushing up against people that are just peacefully standing still. And then behind them, you've got men in full white coats that are all masked up as well and wearing blue boots and the sick police. So some of the Chinese residents are calling them. But officials in recent days, the Associated Press reports, repeatedly insisted that China must stick with its hardline zero COVID policy that mandates lockdowns, mass testing, and quarantines for anyone suspected of having come into contact with the virus. The policy is seen as taking a harsh toll on the economy and upending lives in many Chinese cities, leading to the World Health Organization and others to call for a change in tack. Calls the ruling Communist Party have angrily rejected. And you can see also this is clear when you look at Chinese state-run media. And China Daily, they've got this story here that says experts home quarantine for COVID patients not workable yet. Beijing's facing severe COVID-19 outbreak as the city's new infections surpassed 4,000 on Saturday, a record high. A doctor of the infectious disease department of Beijing's hospital answered some of the public's most asked questions. And again, the headline there is home quarantines for COVID patients not workable yet. But what's also fascinating about this news site, the official news agency of China, is they have a headline here that harkens to the United States and Dr. Anthony Fauci. And Dr. Fauci saying that the pandemic's not completely over. And he made the rounds on various news outlets over the weekend for the Sunday Talking Head shows, and he talked about COVID-19. And we'll hear some of the questions asked about the origins, about investigations here in the United States. But Dr. Fauci also talking about the COVID situation, and in particular, he was asked, coming out of the holidays, should parents expect schools to shut back down because of COVID-19 increased cases? So here is Dr. Anthony Fauci on CBS over the weekend. And go.
So coming out of the holidays, should parents expect schools to shut down?
I don't know, Margaret. I'm not sure. When you talk about shutting down schools, there's always the collateral
That's also
effects.
radioactive.
It is, exactly. There's always the collateral issue. So you have to balance, and you do it in real time, depending upon the viral load of disease in your region, whether the upper Northeast may be quite different from the Southwest, from the Pacific Coast, from the upper Northwest. So you have to have the local authorities evaluate on a situation-by-situation basis the potential collateral deleterious effects with the effects of what might happen if you have so many kids getting infected.
So Dr. Anthony Fauci not really ruling out school closures with the possibility of increased COVID cases. And again, this is somebody that even the Chinese government is listening to with headlines indicating that Dr. Anthony Fauci doesn't think that the COVID-19 pandemic is over. And again, that headline there highlighting how Fauci, White House top medical advisor, saying that the COVID-19 pandemic is not completely over. That according to Dr. Anthony Fauci on the Talking Heads shows over the weekend. But looking back at China, one of the other interesting policies that they are implementing, which I think kind of shows the severity of the zero COVID policy and how it can translate into control over the economy in China. Friday, the Associated Press reporting that Beijing cut the amount of reserves that banks are required to hold in a move that will help lenders comply with orders to defer repayments by companies that are struggling because of increased antivirus controls. So looking to control the banking of these companies and regulate them to a degree to help facilitate payments if they're not able to follow COVID protocols. There's a lot of concern about the idea of a social credit score type of system that could be brought about over the fear of COVID-19 spreading. Let's get to a quick phone call here at 217-629-7970. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Hey, Greg, it's a mess in China, and no matter what happens, it's going to be a mess in China for a long time. As far as being able to get out of their shutdown and being able to produce the goods that we as American consumers need, especially our electronics that we have unfortunately come to rely on. But I just wanted to reiterate one thing real quickly, that, and I know you have absolutely said this, but COVID is actually a real thing, folks. I had a friend of mine who's 67 in perfect health, caught COVID 2 weeks ago, and he passed this weekend. at 67 in perfect health. Worked every day of his life. So for anybody who thinks this isn't a real thing, get over it.
Yeah, there's no question. I appreciate the call. It's a real virus, and just as there are a whole plethora of other viruses that are out there, and the question is an individual concern of how you go about taking care of yourself. And making sure that you stay home if you're sick and so on. But is it to the scale of what we're seeing in China with their zero COVID policy and what we've experienced in the United States when it comes to the COVID-19 situation? So again, hearkening over to the Chinese daily news. With their, saying that Dr. Anthony Fauci is the one who says COVID-19 is not over. We do get really where he said just that on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd over the weekend. So here he is talking about the pandemic and asking whether it's over or not on Meet the Press NBC.
Is this country ready for another pandemic? And are we still in the one we have not that we've been talking about?
Well, we certainly are still in it. I think you just need to look at the numbers. We're still having between 300 and 400 deaths per day. So I think the idea that, forget it, this is over, it isn't. We're going into the winter right now. We have the wherewithal to mitigate against another surge. It's up to us to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's the thing that's very frustrating, Chuck, among public health officials, including myself. We have an updated vaccine booster that we want to do, but the uptake of that is less than 15%.
So he's pushing vaccines, saying that we're not through the pandemic, and talking about the public health officials and how they're concerned of a lack of take-up of the most recent COVID-19 vaccine. But there's this ongoing dynamic of trust from the public of public health officials, and a lot of that is based on individuals saying one thing, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, and then saying something totally different when it comes to masks, when it comes to vaccines in particular. I mean, they said the vaccine, if you take it, it stops with you. We know that's not the case. 217-629-7970. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Hi, good morning, Greg. The thing is, They present this that they're going to lock us down in a way that they're going to eradicate COVID, and which is, they really present this wrong to the public because we want to lock you down, we're going to keep you safe. But the thing is, they've not eradicated COVID, nor are they heading in that direction to eradicate it. And I think they mislead the public in that direction. As far as Fauci goes, I mean, it really says something when the Chinese are using him to control their people. Those are my thoughts.
Appreciate the call. And yeah, he's talking about Chinese daily news that ultimately has a headline of Dr. Anthony Fauci saying that the COVID-19 pandemic's not over. And this, as you've got the Chinese daily news not even talking at all about the massive protests that are happening in their country, which is very telling. But they have a headline about, hey, the pandemic's not over, according to Dr. Anthony Fauci. One other thing I do want to touch on real quick before we take a break and move on from what's going on in China and the COVID-19 situation. You've got Republicans in the U.S. House that are preparing to investigate not just the origins of COVID-19, but also to investigate Dr. Anthony Fauci. And here's what he had to say to that particular prospect.
They've clearly
CBS.
politicized it. They say that I'm not political at all, period. I've never been, and anybody who knows anything about me knows that that's the case. But it is very clear when people are running their campaigns with an anti-Fauci element to it. I mean, that's ridiculous. This is a public health issue. So, yeah, it's going to keep going, likely much more geared towards me. I mean, it's obviously a political issue. I'm not going to get involved. I didn't get involved before in the politics, and I'm not going to get involved now.
So was he going to be answering questions that people have about the origins of COVID-19 and about COVID-19 mitigation plans, how those came about, and so on, including what kind of tax dollars were used to fund the Wuhan virology lab that is suspected to be where this leaked out of. We shall see. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk.